Hey guys, breaking down more baits and techniques, and today I'm going over the football jig. So the jig category of lures is probably my favorite category in all of bass fishing, and each jig serves its own specific purpose. It has its own unique role to play. And when it comes to the football jig, the role of the football jig is to be casted far distances and dragged along the bottom. That's what it's meant to do. The flipping jig is more of like a close range. You flip it in, you top it a couple times, you bring it back. The swim jig is like a cast and retrieve, almost like a swim bait. But the football jig is designed to be a cast, let it sink to the bottom, and slowly drag it along the bottom all the way back. And it's designed specifically for that with a couple key components. Number one, obviously, being the football-shaped head. And what that does primarily, it does two things, but the first one is it keeps that bait upright much, much better. If you can see a quick demonstration, because of that wide-shaped head, if I tap this football jig back and forth, it doesn't fall over. It doesn't roll over on its side. Whereas if I take a flipping jig like this one, if I give it one tap, it's going to fly over on its side just like that. It doesn't stay balanced very well. So when you're dragging the jigs in open water, a flipping jig is going to roll over on its side and be much more likely to snag on something on the bottom. But the football jig, because of that really wide-shaped bulbous head, it stays upright pretty much all the time. The second reason for that football-shaped head is it handles rocks a lot better. It doesn't wedge and snag in rocks very easily. It's very good at kind of bouncing up over the rocks because it's very wide, very flat in shape. And then it can also kind of crawl or wiggle its way up above, even if you do wedge it a little bit. Of course, you're still going to snag eventually if you're fishing in really heavy rocks, but the football jig, when you're dragging it along, is much, much better at handling rocks and staying upright and snag-free in that bottom dragging situation. Another design component of the football jig that makes it better for open water, long casting, and dragging is the hook. The hook, if you'll notice, is much, much thinner gauge and lighter wire than like a flipping jig or swim jig would be. And the reason is when you make a long cast, you're very far away from your bait, so it's hard to get a good solid hook set with a really thick, heavy gauge hook, especially because you also still have the weed guard protecting the hook that you have to drive your hook through to set the good hook into the bass. That lighter wire, thin gauge hook is much, much easier to set the hook at a far distance when you're making those long casts with the football jig. So when you're long casting and dragging, expansive areas, the football jig is really the best designed jig for it. It's got the head shape that handles your hard structure and keeps your hook clean and up off the bottom. Then it's got the thinner hook that allows you to have a high percentage hook set even at a far distance away. Now, when it comes to the retrieval for a football jig, you probably already guessed it, but it's just a drag. You can obviously add in a couple of hops or shakes here and there just to give a bit different profile, presentation, sound even with the head bouncing around. But for the most part, you cast out your football jig and you just slowly drag it along the bottom. You're trying to imitate crawfish in the open, out and vulnerable. That's what the football jig is. It's a pretty big profile, it's a pretty big bait, and it causes a bit of a disturbance as it's dragged with that wide head and that flared skirt along the bottom, so it can call bass in from a pretty good distance. For the most part, you're just casting it and slowly dragging it. You're trying to target those bass that are hunkered down on the bottom, maybe a little bit lazy. They're not really chasing bait fish. They're just big bass sitting on the bottom waiting for a big crawfish, easy snack to drag right past them. And when it comes to when to fish a football jig, it definitely catches bass all year round. The two times I really prefer it, though, are in the middle of summer and the middle of winter. Those two extreme periods, it really seems to outproduce. As long as your bottom composition allows for it, it can definitely catch fish all year round. There's no doubt about it. But in the middle of winter and the middle of summer, it really seems to work really good. In the middle of winter, bass are pretty lazy. They're almost always hunkered down the bottom. Everything's kind of stiff and cold and doesn't want to move a lot. So a slow, dragging presentation bait is always a great option. And the football jig, because it's specifically designed to be a slow, dragging bait, it really, really works good in the wintertime when those bass are lazy. In the middle of the summer, it's kind of the same thing, but obviously on the opposite side of the spectrum. Those bass are a little bit lazy because of overheating. They just want to hunker down on the bottom and wait for a big, easy meal to come by them. They don't want to chase bait all the time because they're hot and worn out. And in the summer, when the bass are hunkered down on the bottom, again, waiting for an easy meal, much like the winter, the football jig is perfect to drag right by them and get those big, lazy bass to bite. Now, like I mentioned, as long as your bottom composition allows for it, the football jig will work all year round, pretty much any weather conditions as well. And when it comes to that composition, that bottom composition, you want a hard bottom. You don't want it to be really grassy or really muddy because the football jig doesn't handle grass all that well. It's got a real wide head. It just gets kind of caught up in that grass and it's a headache to fish. You're not necessarily going to snag it and lose your bait, but it's constantly going to be grabbing and snagging on that grass, and it's going to be a headache and very inefficient to fish in vegetation. And again, on a muddy bottom, this really goes for any bottom contact bait. You really don't want to fish it on a super muddy bottom. because bass don't really like to eat off of a really muddy bottom. They have to suck in to eat your jig, and if they suck in a bunch of mud, it's just often not worth it for them. So you want kind of a hard bottom, either a sand bottom or gravel or rock, or even like a clay bottom, as long as it's hard clay and not towards the muddier side. Football jig on a hard bottom, that's what you're looking for. Whether it's rocks, clay, shells, or sand, a hard bottom that allows you to drag it without snagging on grass or kicking up a bunch of mud is really, really ideal for the football jig. When it comes to the trailers, it's really, really simple. It's going to be the same as every other style of jig, with the exception of a swim jig, because that's more of a swim bait profile. But you're going to have two styles of trailers. Your dead action trailers, like a chunk or beaver style trailer, that doesn't really swim in the water, just kind of glides naturally. That's going to be your cold or really clear water trailer. It's more natural. In the really, really clear water, it just looks more like an actual crawfish. Crawfish don't really flare their claws around. And in the really cold water, everything just kind of moves less. Everything's kind of stiff. So less action is generally more in the cold water. Then on the other side, you're going to have your swimming or flapping style of trailers that actually swim a lot and kick a bunch of water. This is going to be your really, really warm water, because those bass are a little more aggressive in the warm water, and every type of crawfish or bait fish just moves a little bit more erratically, has more water displacement when it's warmer. They want to move a lot more in the warm water. And then additionally, in really muddy water, the extra vibration of a flapping or swimming trailer just helps the bass find it from a little bit farther off. It can definitely get you more bites, and when it's muddy, you don't need to be quite as realistic, because the bass, they're more worried about finding the bait than the bait being the perfect profile. So pretty much cold or really clear water, a dead action chunk or beaver, and warm or muddy water, you go with a swimming or flapping trailer. And when it comes to the gear to fish a football jig, it's always going to be bait casting gear. I like around a medium heavy action. That's pretty much perfect. And then I like 15-pound test fluorocarbon line. You can do like a braid to fluoro or a little bit heavier fluorocarbon. Some guys like if you're fishing for a really big bass. But for the most part, a 7-foot medium heavy action bait casting setup works great. Then I like just 15 pounds, kind of an all-around fluorocarbon setup. It works great. Alright guys, that's pretty much everything you need to know about fishing a football jig. It can be a great bait. It's one of the best bottom contact baits out there, especially at getting those big, big bites, because it's a little bit bigger profile than most of your Ned rigs or shaky heads or those more finessed bottom contact baits. So it's a really, really good big bite getter. It's an awesome jig to fish, and it can really put some big bass in the boat. Thanks for watching, and feel free to subscribe if you want.